Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We're here doing this live for a very special occasion. We are here today to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the UNESCO Silk Roads program. And I'm in the excellent company of Peter Frankopan. Peter, hello.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us today. So to get us started, would you mind introducing yourself for our viewers, please?
Hello, I'm Peter Frankopan. I'm Professor of Global History at Oxford University and UNESCO Chair of Silk Road Studies at King's College, Cambridge. And I'm a historian and I'm involved with the Silk Roads programme here at UNESCO as co-chair of the Under 35 Youth Programme Award.
And so could you tell us perhaps a little more about your research?
Well, I'm a global historian, so my perspectives are always trying to join up different peoples, different groups, different regions. And I work on something called the Silk Roads. And we argue a little bit about what these Silk Roads really are. They're not a series of roads, like some people sometimes think of them, but they're about the exchanges of ideas, of goods, of genetics, of the ways in which humans, and in fact other species on this earth, have connected across the three really big continents that link together, which is Asia, Europe and Africa. So normally when we think about the Silk Roads, we start with Central Asia as the connector that has very own rich histories, but links to north, south, east and west. But the Silk Roads is all about systems of exchange. And I'm interested in local exchanges. Most of us, our engagements with each other and our next door neighbours, our local shops are the ones that are most intense. But sometimes the things that come from a long way away make us really excited and interested. And the Silk Roads is about trying to do these two things together, to look at routine, day-to-day exchanges, and then what are the influences that come from further away, and how did, I'm particularly interested in human history, but how did our common ancestors think about change, environmental, climatic, political, military, but to then use the ideas of the Silk Roads to capture the way in which we look at interactions in the past. And my own interests are quite omnivorous. So I go back a couple of thousand years, starting in antiquity, but I'm interested in that world of today where the connections between peoples across the areas of the Silk Roads, and in fact now globally, seem to me one of the most important questions of the 21st century to be thinking about.
Okay, well, actually, this is a perfect follow-up then, because I wanted to introduce the latest issue of the UNESCO Courrier entitled Tales of Silken Times, and Peter Frankopan contributed to the issue. So my question here, you were just saying it, but the maritime and land routes of the Silk Road still remain a valuable source of exchange and cooperation today. So in what ways do you believe the Silk Roads contribute to preserve and promote common heritage in the modern era?
Well, as a historian, I think the first point is to understand where we've all come from. So to encourage dialogue and respect and mutual understanding, working out how we've all got to where we are in the modern world seems to me not just important but essential to be able to have constructive conversations, to understand more about each other. So that's the first point. I guess in today's world, we have this sort of distinction that between land and maritime Silk Roads. I mean, I'm slightly curious in a way why we bother to do that. It doesn't really matter to me how people interact, whether they're traveling by ship or overland. But I think that in a world of great change that we're living through today in the 21st century, where we see the rise of China, we see Russia on the move with its invasion of Ukraine, we see Central Asia trying to work out what its future is and what are the connections between the different parts of Central Asia, if any. We see Iran, India and Pakistan, and the whole of the communities that expand outwards from this, that the world is on the move right now. And as a historian, I'll tell you that that's not the first time that's ever happened. And in fact, there are many episodes in the past where we can see that reshuffling of ecologies, reshuffling of a political order that could be quite helpful to understand today. But the first point, and why we're here at UNESCO, why I work as an academic and as a professor, is to explain what has happened in the past and to not overlook those moments of connections, but also to not overlook those moments of compression, dislocation, war in the past that has made the world as it is. So I think that with Silk Roads, one can focus on the cultural heritage. That's what we tend to like to do, look at the magnificent buildings and the structures, but also that's put within a context of how did these great cities flourish in the past and also to understand why it was that some of them failed. So that process of change is something that's fundamental to understanding our connections.
Okay, thank you. So back in 2015, you published your book, The Silk Roads, A New History of the World. And you mentioned that globalization is often misconstrued as a uniquely modern phenomenon. But in fact, it was actually a fact of life 2,000 years ago, as you started mentioning. So how do you believe this phenomenon has evolved throughout the centuries? And in what ways can we identify it today?
Well, globalization sounds like something brand new, a bit like sustainability, whereas people were always worried about sustainability in the past and about environmental change. But globalization just means the way in which goods are able to move over longer distances. And of course, not all goods are equal. So things that you can grow in your back garden tend to be not particularly exciting because everyone can grow them in their back garden. But things that are rare, unusual, they can be foods, they can be metals, they could be gold, they could be lapis from mines in Afghanistan. Those kinds of things are more notable. And those were moving around the world thousands of years ago. More than 2,000 years ago, one can talk about some forms of exchanges of goods and materials, but also technology and knowledge. That the big difference is that over the last 2,000 years, we have become able to use more technologies that allow us to move things faster and quicker. Mm-hmm. So now, any of us going online can order something from the other side of the world, and all things considered, it should be here within 24 hours. And that's something which is incomprehensible to people living 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. But even then, the idea of new technologies and new ideas like lacquerware finding its way in exchange between Egypt and Japan, it's incredible to see the levels at which things and ideas were moving. But they really did move. And in today's world, it's the speed. And the speed isn't necessarily always good because there are downsides of globalization of goods.
Yeah,
the generation of energy requirements that be able to move things quickly. And the production processes mean that markets get flattened. And there are things one has to consider about this. It's not just about consumption. Mm-hmm. But these are things I think that were very familiar over long periods in history. So I think most generations always think that they're the first to be confronting problems like pandemics, yeah, or globalization or connections or environmental change. But the joy of history is explaining that when we look at the past centuries, there's so much we can learn. And there's so much we can learn from people much cleverer than I am, try to solve and try to think about some of these questions and challenges and opportunities too.
So the following question is a bit unrelated, but this is more of a cheekier kind of question. We were curious, actually, do you have a favorite example of a surprising Silk Road exchange, and are there still traces visible today?
Oh, God, I mean, my joy, the best thing about being a historian is that every day is like solving a Netflix sort of murder mystery. There are so many things that are completely astounding when you read about the past. And one of my favorites, for example, was a caliph in Baghdad about just over 1,000 years ago, who developed a real love of aubergines. He was obsessed by getting the best quality aubergines that he could possibly find. Another one, reading about vegetarianism. It's such an important part of many people's lifeways today, and the way in which we're changing protein consumption for environmental reasons. I've spent some time thinking about or reading about vegetarianism in the past, and how people, again, in the same period, 1,000 years ago, in Baghdad, at this time was the great city in the Middle East, and cookbooks saying, this is how we should prepare vegetables. This is how we can make vegetables taste and look like meat. And then, of course, just like today, people complaining, saying, I don't want my food to look like meat. I want it to taste like meat. I don't want things that are going to look like they're going to be tasty, but I want things that are going to be the real thing. And so these exchanges happen all the time. So you can do personal things where you have monks traveling from China right the way down to Sri Lanka, where they are explaining what they see and sometimes completely misunderstanding. I quite enjoy people who are trying to make sense. And I really understand how you can get things wrong. I mean, that's something I make mistakes all the time. Of what you see isn't always the reality. So I quite like misinformation from the past. People in China, for example, gathering information about the size of cows and sheep in Europe, thinking that they were 4 or 5 times the size, massive. Yeah. So I quite like those kinds of stories, but I have real sympathy and real empathy for my fellow historians, hundreds, thousands of years ago, trying to explain the world that they see around them. And that's something which I'm just the latest in a tradition, as my colleagues working in universities around the world too, try to make sense of the world that we can see. And those exchanges about trying to work out what do people want, why do they have different tastes, why are we different, what makes us similar, how do the world between the people living in cities and people living on the great steppes, the lands, the flat lands that were home to nomadic peoples across the whole of Asia, how do they understand each other and why do they get things about each other wrong? How do they misjudge? And those kinds of things are, they're so fascinating to read about. And when you read the words that people were writing in the past, it's a privilege to have their words captured. And some of the peoples I work on have oral traditions where the ways in which memories are recovered. It's something that you do so well at UNESCO, of privileging all cultures rather than just one. And I think it's the putting that jigsaw puzzle together. There's not a single day that I don't realise how lucky I am to be able to do that. And the things that happen here at UNESCO in Paris and the different UNESCO programmes, it's all about showcasing those exchanges, capturing the cultures, capturing the importance of difference, but within the context of the fact that we are all part of the same species, and the way in which we try to understand each other.
That we have a shared humanity.
A shared humanity, exactly.
Okay. To talk now about a little more about your role as Peter Frankopan is involved in the UNESCO Silk Roads Youth Research Grant, we wanted to know how can young people actually contribute to building intercultural dialogue along the Silk Roads?
Young people are the answer to everything, or always have been, not some old boy like me. Young people set the agenda for the kinds of things they're interested in. So, and that's we see that in the political world, of course, but they don't always get listened to. But young scholars are the ones who set what it is that the next questions should be. And so, with the under 35 grant that we make here, again, one of the things that's incredible is to see the range of applications that come in from all around the world. No sort of limitations to what counts as being the Silk Roads. We've had award winners from West Africa, award winners from the Philippines, from places that perhaps don't immediately sound like that they belong in the Silk Roads, but they really are about exchanges with peoples from elsewhere on the planet. And the range of what young people want to work on, the kinds of questions they want to think about, it's not just how do we fit them into the academic world, it's these are the next frontiers that get broken down. These are the ways in which new challenges get solved. So the scheme, we give 12 awards every year. We try to be as inclusive as we can around different regions and different periods as well, different topics. And like all competitions, it's really difficult to choose between the best candidates. But we've done a couple of versions now, 2 years, and we're just entering our third year. And it's so important to help young scholars, not just in their research, but to be promoting their work, because these are the next people who are going to shape the field of history, the way in which we think about culture and exchange. So sometimes we think that young people, that they should find a way to follow the great and the good, but they are the great and the good. And helping young people get their foot on an academic ladder, giving them the prestige of winning a UNESCO award, helping fund their research. It's so important to show that their work really matters. And in many parts of the world, the Silk Road is expendable. It's not the most important area, because here in France, where we're talking, of course, people were most interested in French history, in China, Chinese history, and in India, it'll be a history of India and the Asian peoples. And I think that the Silk Roads, when it comes to exchanging connections, it's always more complicated because it's linguistically more challenging, it's intellectually more complicated. And to find those processes of supporting young scholarship, it's hugely significant. So I hope we'll be able to carry this grant scheme on for many years in the future.
Yeah, me too. And I hope the young people out there, the young viewers, took good note of what was just said here. You are the future. Okay, I'll try and wrap this up with one final question. So, since we're here to celebrate the 35th anniversary of the UNESCO Silk
Happy
Roads
birthday.
program, thank you. Happy birthday. We wanted to know how you believe an international organization such as the UN can contribute to promoting the shared heritage of these roots.
Well, okay, I guess there are three important ways. One is advocacy, of constantly reminding people of the built environment, common cultural heritages, and of exchange, and showcasing minority voices, I think is one. The advocacy of making sure that we understand the importance of the past and of its preservation. Second, like all organizations, and it's something that people don't like to talk about, it involves funding. It requires the ability to protect, and protection of intellectual property, protection of archaeological and cultural remains is expensive. To be able to restore buildings. And I understand that for political decision makers, there are a lot of commitments of supporting the world of today, reducing inequality, helping alleviate poverty. And in those worlds, then looking after old buildings and intellectual programs might seem like it's a luxury. But once those die and disappear, they're gone. So the funding required. And then the third is bringing voices together. And groups like UNESCO, organizations like UNESCO and other UN agencies sometimes get criticized because they're thought to not do enough. But bringing people together, putting them in a room, making them talk is not as easy as it sounds. That starts with equalities and showing that you are willing to listen to all voices. And I think that the more that happens, the more that we do birthday parties like today for UNESCO's 35th birthday for the Silk Roads, the more we have a chance of trying to join dots in a world that looks to me very brittle, very fragmenting, and where people don't want to listen to each other. So finding a way to showcase scholarship, to showcase what young people are doing, to be encouraging dialogue and discussions. Every small piece, every small grain of rice helps, and when they all add up, they mean something, and it does mean something that we write about in the Courrier. It does mean something that we think about other people's cultures. It matters that we think, who are we not representing, whose voices are not here, and who should we do better to protect and preserve, and also what kind of things are we missing. And there's lots of different things we could talk about along the Silk Roads more, about gender, about young people and children, about sexualities, around voices that are not being listened to. And the more we can showcase those and learn from each other, the better. So UNESCO's cultural programme is hugely important, and it's a real privilege and honour to be involved.
Well, it's a privilege for us to have you involved with us. So unfortunately, we're going to have to end it here, but thank you so much. We wish we had a bit more time to keep on picking your brain.
Will there be a birthday cake for this afternoon? I hope so.
I hope so too. I'm not fully aware.
35 candles.
And for those of you who are interested in knowing more about Peter's research, we'll be adding the link to the UNESCO Courrier issue in the comment section, so be sure to go and check it out. Thank you again for joining. Have a good day.